Welcome to In Our Community. I'm Stephanie Charles. I'm your host today. And on today's show, we're going to have two really interesting guests. Our first one is Nancy Nguyen. Nancy is the executive director of the Ping and Amy Chao Family Foundation. And welcome to the set, Amy. Glad to have you on the show today.
Thank you so much for having me here.
Okay.
How are you doing today?
Wonderful. And you?
Doing well. I'm really looking forward to sharing our story.
Okay. Well, Nancy was telling me that the foundation was started in 2005 by Ping Chao, a local high-tech entrepreneur. He and his wife, Amy, started this the Chao Foundation in order to do outreach to poor children with health issues around the world, primarily in Asia, and also to provide opportunities for Asian philanthropy among youth in Asia and develop that concept. So Nancy has brought a short video today showing some samples of the work that the Chao Foundation does and the Transparent Fish Fund, which is the public entity that funds a lot of these projects that you do. So why don't we roll the video? So Nancy, you were telling me that corruption is a really big problem in China with nonprofits, and so one of the key things that the Transparent Fish Fund, or TFish you were calling it, does is identify trustworthy partners to work with. And I gather you've got a lot of partners, as you showed in your video. Yes. Now you were going to tell us about one particular project today, the Little Red Scarf Project. What is that? Tell us about it.
So as you can see, the little girl in the video wearing the purple scarf, her name is Little Red. And she, 6 years ago, we had set out a goal to save or treat 1,000 children. And she's very special to us because she happens to be our 1,000th child who received congenital heart surgery. And 3 months ago, I actually traveled to Gansu province in rural China. And it was a tough 8-hour journey. We had to climb up to the peak of a mountain, as you can see in the photos on the screen. And when we arrived to the location, our entire team was in tears because we found Little Red on her grandmother's back, and her face was deep blue because she's in such a remote region. She's never seen so many strangers before. She was frightened. And we found out that she has been carried her entire life on the backs of her family members.
She's never walked?
She's never been able to walk because of this disease, and she has the most severe form of congenital heart disease. So we talked to doctors, and doctors said if they're able to operate on her, it would come with high cost and also higher risk. But without the operation, she can only survive up to 1 or 2 more years. So it was a very devastating story, and we did everything we could to help her.
And so you called this the Little Red Scarf Project. Is that named after Little Red?
It's actually a happy coincidence. Many children in China have little in front of their name, but our program is actually named after the red scarves that all children in China wear when they're able to attend school. So our hope is that after surgery, these children are able to wear the red scarf and attend school like other normal children. Many of these kids are not able to attend school because they have weakness in their body and trouble breathing. And so oxygen, there's a defect in their heart by birth, so oxygen is not circulated very well in the body, so leading to cyanosis, which is blueness in the face, also clubbing the rounded of their fingers, and stunted growth. Many of them are not able to walk, can only take a few steps, like little Red, she's not able to walk at all, and they would be squatting and on the ground to catch their breath. So then a lot of these children are also shunned by society because they're not like other children. And especially if you're a female, there's really no hope for you because in this culture, they value male over female. So many family members would gather money to, for treatment for their males. So many of the children we've helped have been females.
So in the case of someone like Little Red, you had surgery to cure that defect in her heart?
Yes, so she's completely treated 2 months ago, and she's doing very well today. She's a completely different person, very rosy, and she's come out of her shell as well and able to talk to people now.
Oh, that's wonderful. So what else does the foundation do with respect to these kids that you're helping? I know you've got some other aspects of this program.
Yes, so we started out as a grant-making foundation, mainly focused in Asia, because our founders is Mr. and Mrs. Ping and Amy Chao. They started, they have close ties to Asia because it's their homeland, but through the church we found out that there's a high prevalence of congenital heart disease in Gansu province, and so there's different causes to this high prevalence due to high elevation, environmental factors, and also genetics. And because of this, we set up an office there with 4 local staff, where I went and I trained the local staff, and we worked with 2 local hospitals to provide surgery for these children. So we not only fund the surgeries, but we provide holistic care. So from when the family enters the hospital until when they exit the hospital, we pretty much advocate on their behalf and protect them, because many of these families come from rural backgrounds with no education and also a language barrier. They speak different dialects. And after surgery, we also follow up until the child is 18 and provide poverty relief programs such as microfinance assistance and also scholarships. And last year we actually heard very good news from our first child to be able to attend college. Her name is Lena, so we're very happy to hear that.
So from not able to go to school at all because of the defect in her heart to graduate going to college. That's wonderful. Yeah. So how do you find these kids that you help?
So many of the children, we travel in the first few years to remote regions because many of the families live so far away that they're not aware that a free program exists. And also we have referrals from doctors. When patients and families come to the hospital and the doctors see that they're poor, they would refer them to our program. But the best form of referral actually is from the families that have gone through our program, who have had successful heart surgery, returned back to their village, and just shared the good news with everyone in the village, and to help us identify these cases.
I bet they're your best salespeople. So how did you find Little Red?
So a doctor one day called our staff, and she said, "You have to come into our office right now. This is, never seen any child so severe." So our staff came, and she was shocked to find that Little Red was deep blue, and her family was just in utter despair because they were so poor and they could not afford the surgery.
And so then you did the surgery. Now, medical care in this country, I know, is very expensive. What is it like to do the surgery there in China? How much does it cost?
So the average cost is around $4,000. But depending from simple to most complex cases, it can range from $3,000 all the way to over $10,000. And the family usually covers a portion based on how much they're capable of. and their poverty level. And the government also provides farmers insurance to cover a portion, and we cover a portion as well. But in the case of Little Red, because her family was just so poor, we decided to cover the entire surgery fees for her, which was $7,400.
A lot of money for a family as poor as what we were seeing in the pictures.
Yes.
So how's Little Red doing now?
She's just wonderful. She actually came back to the hospital 3 days ago, and she came in for a checkup, and then we couldn't recognize her. Her hair is longer, she's happier, she's just very sociable, and she's ready for school in September as well.
Fabulous. How old is Little Red?
She's 8 years old.
Okay.
Yeah.
So she's ready to go to school, and you've made it possible.
Yes.
That's wonderful. So how did you get involved in this kind of work?
So I started working at a very young age, when I was 18. And I started working in Vietnam because that's where I was from. I came here when I was 5 years old, and there's a lot of poverty issues. So I came there, and I also started working with children with congenital heart disease in Vietnam, helping visit the hospitals, deliver the funds to the hospital, making sure that 100% of the funds are used for surgery and for their families and not for anything else. And that was my first 5 years in working in Vietnam, and afterwards I started working for the foundation. So the next 5 years was focused mainly on this project and many of our other projects as well.
So I remember when I was a kid, I had a friend who was a blue baby, and during recess we always just sat on the bench because she couldn't run around and play. But I've never seen one since. I mean, I guess they do the surgery to cure people in this country, but is it a common problem in China and other parts of Asia, Vietnam, where you started?
Yeah, it's actually very common in these parts of the world, especially in regions that are impoverished because families cannot afford the surgery. So you would see a higher prevalence of this type of problem. But in the States, if they find out that a child has congenital heart disease, they'll probably correct it with surgery at an earlier age. So you'll see less cases, but the prevalence is all over the world.
I see. Okay, news to me. I just know in this country you don't see it anymore. Sounds like you're doing wonderful work there. Now, if your stories have inspired people, how can they get involved? How can they help?
So they can help by selecting a specific child and helping the child with the surgery costs. And also they can select from a variety of projects that we have, as you can see in the introduction video, that touches their heart. They can go on our website at www.tfishfund.org to find out more information. And if they're really touched by Little Red's story today, we'd love to have them make a donation. And their dollar really makes a difference, and they'll really change a life.
Now, you mentioned a lot of other projects, and I know you work throughout Asia. Can you tell us a few of the other projects that you're doing?
We're also in Vietnam. We have some programs, computer classes for orphans. We have housing construction, bridge construction. We're in Nepal for midwife training, birthing centers. Taiwan, we have prison ministry. So it's a variety of projects, and we're also starting new projects in education in Cambodia and other regions as well.
Why don't we run, we have, I think, a 15-second video showing Little Red. Let's see that. It's showing the difference that the surgery made to her life. So that was Little Red before the surgery.
Yeah, this is 3 months ago, and this video was taken by me, and she was just very sad. And this is her 3 days ago.
Wow, climbing a flight of steps.
Yeah, this is actually 10 flight of steps up to our office, which is on the highest level.
Well, very, very moving. I want to thank you, Nancy, for joining us today. And from us in our community, we hope you enjoyed this, and we'll be right back with a second guest. Thanks, Nancy.
Thank you.
Welcome back to In Our Community. I'm Stephanie Charles, and our second guest today is Karl Matzke. Now, Karl is the Business Continuity Manager at Stanford Hospital and Clinics, and he's a management board member and project lead for the Stanford Alumni Project, and that's not what we're talking to him about today. In all of his spare time, and I can imagine how much spare time having those two jobs leaves you, Karl is a very active Red Cross volunteer. Karl has been working for the Red Cross in disaster relief for over 8 years. He's been out on something like a dozen national disaster responses and has held, as you might imagine, given his professional background, a lot of leadership positions locally and on major disaster responses. So we want to hear all about the Red Cross and disaster relief. What kinds of disasters have you been out to, Karl?
Well, I've been out to both national disasters that are local and ones that are all across the country. I guess the one that most people around here remember quite recently was the Asiana plane crash. So where we had a number of survivors, which was the good news. A lot of plane crashes, you don't have that many, but we had 290, I think, people survived the crash, and so we had to take care of them. And that was done up near the airport, the facility here. But it was a national disaster. It just happened that I could go home at night. So that was nice.
Definitely. Now, what other kinds? Because that's not what I think of when I think of the Red Cross.
Exactly. And as you heard in the discussion earlier, the question of disasters and emergencies, they come in all sizes. So whether it's an individual one, such as a heart problem, or it's a typhoon that wipes out an entire nation, they're all disasters. Just some of them affect you more than others. And in our case, we have about, in this county, Santa Clara County, we have about 150 house fires every year, which is a big disaster for you if it happens to be your house or maybe your family member's house. But to the entire county, it's something that happened. So it's really the empathy part. And one of the bigger ones, such as the plane crash, has an emotional impact on a lot of people, even if they don't fly that often, because it's something that you don't expect. The big one we worry about in this area, of course, are earthquakes. Other parts of the country, it's hurricanes. So we are in a wonderful place where we get all sorts of disasters, whatever kind you wish.
I'm not sure I should feel comforted by that.
And you don't necessarily wish them to happen, but they do anyway.
So when I see the Red Cross on TV, it's usually a shelter. In fact, I saw one on the PBS NewsHour today. A shelter, Red Cross blankets, and so forth. What did you do for Asiana? A plane crash doesn't fit that model, does it?
No, it doesn't. But there's a lot of comfort and care which happens because it's very high stress. So they refer to it as disaster mental health, talking through issues that people are having. A number of the people that went through the plane crash, they were from Asia. So whether they're from China or Taiwan or Korea, at some point they'd probably like to go home. It's hard to walk. It's hard to drive. So in general, they needed to get back on airplanes. So we needed to provide assistance for them. There was medical assistance. A number of people obviously went to hospitals. They went to, went to 16 or 18 different hospitals with a large number of people that were injured. But then they were recovering and they still need to go home and they need some care to get there. So we provided clothing assistance. Generally, when you are in a plane crash, you don't have a lot of clothes in your pocket and you're running out, and if you remember those instructions, leave all your belongings behind and come off the plane. So you have nothing. You don't, many people didn't have their wallets, they didn't have their phone chargers, they had nothing. So we helped them get clothes, we helped them get other supplies so they could get home.
I see. So not the normal things you might think of, but it was
it's
what
very
they
different.
needed.
Right. So I think that's the key to any disaster response. It's the compassion to help people get back on with their lives, whatever that life was. And we in the Red Cross treat all kinds. So we are open to everyone. If you're a billionaire and you need shelter for the night, we're there for you. Or if you're homeless and having come from sleeping under one of Highway 85 bridges and you need help, then we do that too. So it's the full range of compassionate care.
So I understand you've been out to fires and hurricanes and all kinds of things. Do you have some interesting stories about people you've helped?
Well, yeah, I think I'll start with the very first one. My first disaster was, which is very current now with all the drought we're having in the wildfires, was the set of wildfires that were in San Diego about 6 years ago. And I was in the shelter. It was my very first deployment, and they said, great, we need you, come and help, because the city opened up their shelter, they opened up their school, because the wildfire was coming down the hill at 60 miles an hour. It was passing the fire trucks coming down the hill. So it was moving very quickly. They evacuated a large area very quickly, set up in the schools, the high school there. And the local community could handle it for 12 hours. And they said, wait a minute, we need some help. Could you guys come and help us? So we showed up there, 2 volunteers, me brand new, and it turned out the shelter manager got lost going to the shelter. So I arrived and said, the Red Cross is here. They're taking over. And I said, thank you. I'm glad we're here. And I listened to their story and I complimented them on how well they were doing and their plans they had in place for the night. I said, you know what, we'll take over at breakfast. And so it worked out for all of us, because by 1 o'clock in the morning, we had roughly 1,500 to 2,000 people at the shelter site.
So this is a big shelter.
It's a big shelter, and we had a grand total of staff of 4 at that point. And so we had more troops coming, but that's all we had at 9 o'clock. By 1 o'clock in the morning, we took delivery of 1,500 cots. By 9 o'clock in the morning, we were setting them up after serving breakfast.
Now, how do 4 of you set up 1,500 cots?
You use a lot of the clients for assistance, and the people are willing to help. In fact, they're interested in helping. The last thing you want to do is just lay on a cot all day. You want to do something that is productive and helps your community. And your community is that shelter. In their case, their community was the city that was evacuated into that site. So it all worked out, and people are really generous of spirit, and I think that's what we take into account. It was a wonderful experience for everyone.
I would gather so, since you stayed for another 8 years. You're still doing it. Now I have a question for you. One of the things you saw a lot of on TV had to do with pets. Now I have a Great Dane named Arnie, and Arnie is very special to me. If I were burned out in a wildfire or something, or big earthquake, and went to the shelter with Arnie, what's the Red Cross going to do with him?
Well, that's a really interesting question, because according to Red Cross policy, we don't take care of animals unless they're service animals, because we don't really have the facilities to do it. That story I just told you about the wildfires in San Diego, it turned out I had 350 animals. I had anything from chickens and turtles to hundreds of dogs, cats, llama.
At your shelter?
At the shelter. Llamas, horses. All at the shelter. Turns out it was a rural area, so they had a paddock for the horses and the llama, but we had everything there. And we said, well, it's Red Cross policy that we don't have animals, and the principal of the school said, excuse me, I'm sleeping here, and one of them's my dog. So, okay, well, we'll make accommodations. You're okay with it, it's your building, and one of our biggest concerns is damage to the facility. You opened with the pets, you're happy, you'll sign off on that? Yep, we will. Done. Okay. Now, would you mind if we separate the people from the people with animals? Oh, that'd be fine. So we just separated them, and we had one room for people with pets, and we had one room with people without pets. We had another room for an evacuated senior citizen shelter. So it all worked, and everybody worked together, and we made commitments. Now, after I came back, then I took the class on running an animal shelter, and I learned all of the things that could have gone wrong. That fortunately didn't. But so we worked through it, and now I know better how to do that next time.
Okay, so the Red Cross, it sounds like, is somewhat flexible in dealing with the situation
What we
as they
try
find
and
it.
do is work with partners. We work a lot with the American Humane Society, with the American Humane Association, and so we bring in a partner who will run the pet shelters. Here in Silicon Valley area, we've got the Silicon Valley Humane Society. So they're our partner, and if we have a disaster here, we'll work with them. We've had a number of house fires where we have people with cats, dogs, puppies, whatever, and so we'll call up the sheltering partner and we say, okay, we can get the hotels, but they won't take pets. Will you help with the shelters? No problem. So we can work that out.
What about food? You had hundreds and hundreds of people in this shelter. How do you feed them?
Food is an issue in every case, because remarkably enough, people do like to eat. No matter how much people pay to spend a day at the spa and fast, somehow they don't think of that during the disaster. So yes, they do like to be fed regularly, and food that they like to eat. So we have ethnic issues that we need to work out. Vegetarian, certainly right now, the fashion and the need for many people is gluten-free. So we have to deal with all of those issues in terms of food. We have a number of wonderful feeding partners that we work with. For a smaller event, it'll be catering. Right here in Mountain View, Google has provided us food for some of our shelters. For other places, we'll use caterers. For other places, there's the Gurdwara in San Jose, which provided vegetarian meals when we needed them. So we have a number of big partners. For larger events, we have the Southern Baptist Convention will come in with kitchens, and a typical kitchen can do 15,000 meals a day. So for Sandy, we had the capability to do in excess of 100,000 meals a day.
So you were in Sandy.
Yes, I was in Sandy as well.
That was a big one from
That
what I
was a
hear.
big disaster, yeah. So I had southern New Jersey. So I only had 4 kitchens and 12 shelters and a bunch of people to help.
Well, good. I'm glad people were willing to help. Now, when you talk about all this food and these partners, do they donate the food, or is the Red Cross buying the food?
The answer is yes, because it depends on the circumstance. For the catering, we typically pay for it. When we're doing large volumes, we have contracts with the major food suppliers. In many cases, it's donated. In the case of Sandy, I'd get a call one day and say from one company, and they wanted to donate 6,000 sandwiches. Okay,
Great.
I could use 6,000 sandwiches. I'm delivering 20,000 today, so yeah, another 6 would be good. We'll find homes for them. So it really depends on the event. In the case I mentioned of Google providing meals for one of our shelters, it was a donation. In other cases, we pay for it. So it's really what the circumstances allow. The first criteria is the people need to get fed on schedule. If it happens we get a donation, fabulous. If it happens we have to pay for it, then we rely on other people's donations that have provided them to the Red Cross earlier. We're entirely funded through donations.
Through donations. So
Yes.
you're not a
People
government.
like you can provide us with funds to operate. The government does not.
The government does not fund the Red Cross.
Correct.
Ah, very interesting. So are you short on donations? Nonprofits are struggling nowadays. Is it a challenge for the Red Cross too?
Well, so it goes in all kinds. The more that money that's donated, the more we can help. So whether it's Sandy, where the relief efforts are still going on, whether it's Haiti and the relief efforts are still going on, whether it's Taiwan in the Philippines, there is always a need. Whether it's the house fire that happened this morning or yesterday, there's always a need. So yes, we can always take advantage of donations. And we thank the generous community that has been providing them to us.
Okay. Now, if someone wants to make a donation, or if they want to get involved and do the sort of thing you do, how would they go about that?
The simplest one is go to redcross.org, go to the website there. There's opportunities to donate both your time and your resources on the web.
Okay. We have another minute or two. Do you have some short, heartwarming story of
Short,
somebody?
heartwarming stories. Well, you know, there are always interesting stories that people come in. The one I will relate, I was in the east for one of the hurricanes that caused a lot of flooding in Pennsylvania. And it turns out that what they were looking for there is Hurricane Irene. And so I was in Pennsylvania. And the floods are very interesting because if you're downstream of the flood, you know days in advance that you're going to be flooded. So it works its way down from the north to the south or whatever direction the river is flowing. And there was a woman in the shelter who the last time they had a hurricane that hit them there in mid-Pennsylvania was 40 years ago. She was in a Red Cross shelter both this time I was there and 40 years ago. And she could compare the two and contrast. And it was very fun. And her family enjoyed her stories. So we had a great time.
I don't think I would ever want to be in the position of comparing the different disasters I had been in. Well, I want to thank you, Karl, very much. This is absolutely fascinating. I hope none of it is directly relevant to anybody who is listening, but if anyone in the audience would like to donate to support a good mission like this, you've told them how to do it. From myself and from the whole rest of the crew at KMVT, I want to thank you for joining us today. This has been In Our Community. Thank you very much.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Okay.
Bye now.